There are a handful of states that seem to be on everyone's moving wish list right now. Places like Texas, Idaho, North Carolina, and Florida, just to name a few. They've been the go-to destinations for years. But the real question is whether these states will still be just as desirable 5 or even 10 years from now. A growing number of people think the answer is no. According to them, the appeal of these states is already starting to fade, even if it's happening quietly. Some were hyped up so much that they may now be paying the price for becoming too popular too fast. What makes this especially interesting is that these states are currently seen as some of the most attractive and sought-after places to live in the country. Yet, if current trends continue, they could end up ranking among the least desirable within the next decade. There isn't just one reason behind this shift. It's a mix of factors. That said, one issue rises above the rest, and it affects every single state on this list: housing costs. When demand explodes, prices almost always follow, and real estate has become a serious problem in these once affordable areas. We'll break down the unique challenges facing each state, but skyrocketing home prices are the common thread tying them all together. So let's take a closer look at these popular destinations and explore why moving to them now might be something you seriously regret in the years ahead. Number 10. Tennessee. People tend to arrive in Tennessee with a certain low-key swagger, like they've cracked a code the rest of the country somehow overlooked. They talk about the lack of state income tax the way someone whispers about a hidden item on a restaurant menu. Music comes up. So does Southern friendliness. Porch weather gets a mention, and almost everyone claims they arrived at just the right moment. Usually they're saying this while standing in a nearly empty beige house, and for a while, they're not wrong. At first, everything feels easier. Monthly expenses seem smaller. The decision to move feels clever, daring, and just rebellious enough to impress friends back home. Social media fills up with sunset photos and backyard cookouts. They start telling people things like, "Honestly, you should look into Tennessee," as if they're sharing insider knowledge rather than a trend. It feels like they've found something special. Then reality starts nudging them, gently at first. It shows up as traffic in cities like Nashville and Memphis, which feels wrong for a state that's supposed to be relaxed and slow-paced. These roads weren't built for this many people. They were designed for a time when traffic meant tractors and pickup trucks, not bumper-to-bumper commuters. Everyone's confused but still mostly patient. For now. Give it another decade and those same highways will look like gridlock in any other fast-growing metro area. And then there's housing. It's no longer the bargain people expected. It sneaks up on you. That house that once felt like a smart buy suddenly feels risky. Property taxes creep higher. Insurance bills arrive wrapped in friendly wording but packed with unpleasant surprises. Ask a longtime resident what homes used to cost, and you'll notice the smiles disappear. Healthcare is another pressure point. Tennessee has never been terrible in this area, but it hasn't exactly stood out either, especially compared to nearby states. Now, with so many new residents pouring in, doctor appointments take longer to schedule and costs are climbing along with demand. What used to feel manageable now feels strained. There's also growing tension around culture and politics. Tennessee has long leaned red, but it's slowly shifting, and that change hasn't been universally welcomed. Longtime residents aren't thrilled, and newcomers are often surprised by the pushback. None of this is deceptive, though. Tennessee didn't pull a bait-and-switch. It followed the same pattern every booming destination does. Early movers were rewarded with space and affordability, while late arrivals paid extra for missing the window. This doesn't mean Tennessee is a bad place to live. It simply means the secret is out. And once that happens, the road ahead gets bumpier. In 5 to 10 years, the growing pains are likely to be much harder to ignore. If you moved here around 2020, you didn't stumble onto something undiscovered. You showed up just as it was hitting capacity. Over the past 5 years, Tennessee's population has grown by about 5.8%, which is a sizable jump. Back in 2020, the median home price statewide sat around $230,000. Today, that number is closer to $339,000, a surge of roughly 47%. When you stack it all together, the biggest sources of regret are clear: overcrowding, rising home prices, and an overall increase in the cost of living. Number 9. Idaho. Idaho was marketed as a long exhale, A place where the noise drops away and life slows down to something more manageable. Wide open views, mountains on the horizon, homes spaced far apart, and mornings that felt calm instead of chaotic. People didn't say they were relocating to Idaho. They said they were escaping there. At least, that's how it sounded in their heads. What they didn't expect was how many other people had the exact same escape plan. Not long after arriving, newcomers realized they weren't alone. They kept running into other recent transplants who were just as excited as they were. At the same time, they also met longtime locals who clearly weren't thrilled about what was happening. Idaho, especially cities like Coeur d'Alene and Boise, has turned into something like a pressure cooker disguised by pine trees and fresh air. Over the past 2 decades, and especially within the last 5 years, housing prices in Idaho didn't simply rise, they launched upward. Meanwhile, wages stayed almost frozen in place, as if they never got the update that everything else was becoming more expensive. Infrastructure struggled to keep up. Roads fell behind. Public services stretched thinner and thinner. And locals didn't lash out in anger, which might have been easier to deal with. Instead, they grew exhausted. You can hear it in the hesitation before they respond, or in the familiar phrase, "It didn't used to be like this." Then winter arrives and quietly ends the debate. Not because of snow, Idaho knows how to handle snow, but because of how long winter sticks around. The days grow short. Darkness lingers. The silence stops feeling calming and starts feeling heavy. Idaho doesn't hand you a ready-made social circle. It assumes you already have one. If you don't, the quiet doesn't soothe you. It sits there with you, uncomfortably present. A lot of states in this region have a way of wearing people down once winter sets in. Someone leaves Southern California for Coeur d'Alene because it looks stunning, trades beaches for mountains, and then after 2 long winters they head right back south. That cycle happens more often than people admit. Idaho works best if you arrive with money, strong family ties, and a clear reason to stay rooted. Everyone else starts questioning things once the scenery stops feeling new and the stillness starts demanding answers. Many people come to Idaho chasing freedom, only to realize it comes bundled with zoning rules, community meetings, and long waiting lists. So where does the regret come from? For most, it's the winters, the resistance from locals who never asked for this growth, and, unsurprisingly, the housing market. Back in 2020, Idaho's median home price sat around $285,000. Today, it's closer to $444,000, representing an increase of roughly 55.9% statewide. That number averages out wildly expensive areas with more affordable ones. But the overall trend is clear. Prices surged fast, and they surged everywhere. Number 8. Arizona. Arizona sells itself by leaving a few important details out. The sunshine is real. No one's lying about that. But so is the heat, the kind that keeps you trapped indoors for months at a time. Most people don't move to Arizona dreaming of becoming homebound, yet that's often exactly what happens. Summer. There isn't just uncomfortable, it's restrictive. It limits how you live your life. There are temperatures that some people simply can't function in, even if others swear they get used to it. I know I wouldn't. Put me in Arizona, and I'd spend the entire summer inside. Give me 3 feet of snow and I'll happily be outdoors all day. A lot of people discover this the hard way. They leave places like Minnesota or North Dakota, thrilled to trade brutal winters for endless sun, only to realize how mentally draining that sun can be when it never lets up. Once you settle in, life starts to shrink. Walking turns into a hassle. Outdoor plans quietly vanish. Power bills climb as air conditioners run nonstop. Cars wear out faster under the relentless heat. That desert fantasy slowly turns into a long-term compromise you didn't fully think through. And that's before the conversation even turns to water. Arizona is extremely dry, and the pace of development has pushed water supplies to the brink. Restrictions are already a reality in many areas, and they're not going away. After you process that, another realization hits. Housing costs are no longer low enough to make all these sacrifices feel worthwhile. That's when the uncomfortable question creeps in. Why am I paying this much money just to avoid being outside? Arizona doesn't chase people away outright. It wears them down gradually. At first, it's manageable. Then, the fatigue builds. Living somewhere you can't comfortably exist outdoors for nearly half the year eventually takes a toll, whether people admit it or not. So where does the regret come from? Start with the heat. No debate there. Add rising home prices. Then pile on the crowds. Arizona has exploded in popularity over the past couple of decades. Since 2020 alone, the state's population has grown by about 6.6%, pushing it to roughly 7.6 million residents. To put that growth into perspective, Arizona had only about 1.7 million people in the 1970s. Every decade since then has seen double-digit growth, with some spikes being massive, like a 53% jump in the 1980s and another 40% increase around 2000. Housing followed the same aggressive trajectory. In 2020, the average home value hovered around $293,000. By 2025, that number had climbed to roughly $421,000. When you combine rising costs with extreme heat and growing congestion, it's easy to see why Arizona may end up on many people's regret list. Number 7. North Carolina. North Carolina is often sold as the rare middle ground that actually delivers. You've got mountains to the west, beaches to the east, solid job markets, major universities, mild winters, and just enough southern charm without feeling like a tourist brochure. On paper, it sounds perfectly balanced. A place where you don't have to pick an extreme and life settles comfortably somewhere in between. And at first, that promise holds up. One town buzzes with energy, another feels quiet and laid back. Drive an hour in almost any direction and it feels like you've crossed into a different state. That variety is the selling point. What people don't always realize is that the contrast doesn't stop at scenery. It affects everything. One school district might be excellent. One hospital feels modern, efficient, and easy to access. Drive a bit farther, though, and healthcare suddenly means long wait times and extended travel just to see a specialist. The state is growing fast, but infrastructure isn't keeping the same pace. Roads lag behind. Utilities strain. Public services are constantly playing catch-up, never quite able to get ahead. New arrivals often believe they've found the perfect window, early enough to enjoy the benefits, late enough to still feel comfortable. Then traffic slowly thickens. Commutes stretch just enough to become annoying. Housing pressure builds quietly at first, then all at once. The neighborhoods everyone wants get expensive. The affordable ones come with compromises no one highlighted up front. That easy, balanced lifestyle turns into daily mental math. Time versus distance, cost versus convenience, savings versus stress. North Carolina isn't falling apart. It's being pulled in too many directions at the same time. Growth without evenly distributed support. Popularity without a pause button. Long-time residents aren't the first to feel the strain. They've already adjusted. It's the newcomers who feel it most, the ones who arrived expecting harmony and instead found a state actively negotiating with itself. North Carolina didn't suddenly lose its balance. It lost the space it needed to maintain it. And that's usually how popular places disappoint. Not because they're bad, but because you showed up after the balance had already been used up. Right now, North Carolina is simply too popular, and you can feel it bending under the weight. Many believe that over the next 5 to 10 years, that bend could turn into a break. The biggest drivers of future regret are already visible: increasing crowds, a rising cost of living, and rapidly climbing home prices. Back in 2020, the state's median home price sat around $231,000. By the end of 2025, it had climbed to roughly $353,000, a jump of about 52.4%. Number 6. South Carolina. South Carolina is the kind of place people defend with pure feeling. Not charts, not data, emotion. Most didn't move there because the numbers lined up. They moved because it felt right. The coastline, the light, the slower pace, it gives off the impression that life might finally be easier to manage. At first, it really does feel like a reset. Then the climate reminds you exactly where you are. The humidity doesn't gently roll in. It sits on you. Summer stops acting like a season and starts behaving like a permanent condition. Storms become more frequent than you expected, and flooding shifts from something you read about afterward to something you plan your life around in advance. Infrastructure designed for a quieter past struggles to keep up with the present. The bills eventually fill in the gaps the scenery doesn't mention. Wages don't rise fast enough to keep pace with daily expenses. Insurance costs balloon, sometimes feeling like a second mortgage hidden behind fine print and annual increases. That charming coastal lifestyle doesn't fade. It shows up every year in the mail, right on schedule. Beauty doesn't erase risk, it bills you for it. South Carolina isn't becoming more affordable, it's becoming more precarious. And risk isn't a lifestyle choice, it's a recurring expense. There's no denying it's a beautiful state. That part is real. But it isn't gentle. Crime is a serious issue in many areas, especially outside the postcard zones. There are plenty of small towns that are struggling badly, the kind newcomers don't picture when they say, "I just want to find a quiet small town." If you're not near the coast, chances are you're closer than you think to a place that's falling apart. And if you are near the coast, affordability disappears fast. So where does the regret come from? It's a combination of rising living costs, crime in certain regions, and environmental risks that never really let up. Hurricanes, flooding, and extreme weather add constant uncertainty. And, as always, real estate plays a major role. In 2020, the average home value in South Carolina was around $212,000. By late 2025, that figure had climbed to roughly $326,000. The price of entry keeps rising, while the risks pile up alongside it. Number 5. Montana. Montana is where romantic ideas go to prove themselves, or fall apart. A lot of people carry around a Wild West fantasy, imagining wide-open land, rugged independence, and a clean break from city life. The traffic, the crowds, the noise, all of it fuels the dream. Montana becomes that mental escape hatch. When you're stuck on a freeway in Los Angeles or boxed in on a train in Boston, that idea hits hard. I can't do this anymore. And suddenly, Montana, or maybe Wyoming, starts sounding like the answer. People say they're moving for peace, space, and quiet. What they often find instead is isolation, expensive housing, limited access to healthcare, and winters that are completely indifferent to your expectations. Jobs are harder to come by. Services are spread thin. A social life doesn't just happen, you have to build it intentionally. Montana has always been a popular place to think about moving to. Not many actually do it. Millions fantasize about it. Only a small fraction ever follow through. It's one of the most common someday states in the country. In those daydreams, you're driving a pickup truck across your own land, because of course you need a pickup. You bought that much land. The reality is usually a modest house on a quarter-acre lot. And for a while, that still feels like success. You're living the Montana dream. Then winter shows up. Most newcomers make it through one winter. Some push through two. By the third, a lot of people start quietly renegotiating with themselves, thinking things like, maybe the suburbs wouldn't have been so bad. Even though Montana has just over 1 million residents statewide, it's starting to feel crowded, and that's because nearly everyone is funneling into the same small cities. And when we say cities, that term is doing a lot of work. Montana doesn't have large urban centers. Billings, the biggest city, has around 117,000 people. Missoula sits near 73,000. Great Falls has about 60,000. Bozeman is closer to 53,000. These are the destinations most newcomers choose. In a massive city like New York, adding 3,000 people over 5 years wouldn't even register. That could happen in a single week and no one would notice. In Billings, Montana, that kind of growth is immediately felt. It changes traffic, housing, prices, and the overall pace of life. And that's exactly what's happening now. With more people arriving, costs across the board are climbing. The cost of living is up. Real estate prices are up. Everything is trending in the same direction. Back in 2020, the average home value in Montana was around $307,000. By 2025, that number had risen to roughly $469,000, an increase of about 52.5%. Montana still looks like freedom from a distance, but up close, it's testing a lot of assumptions people didn't realize they were making. Number 4. Utah. From the outside, Utah looks almost perfect. Everything appears clean, structured, and well-managed. There's visible growth, endless access to the outdoors, and a strong religious presence that gives the impression of safety, order, and moral grounding. But once you're inside the state, the experience can feel very different. Social circles are already formed, communities are tightly woven, housing costs are high, and competition for jobs, homes, and even social footing is intense. If you don't naturally align with the dominant culture, it's easy to feel like you're always standing just outside the circle. You're not rejected outright, but you're not fully included either. For many people, living in Utah feels like being a permanent third wheel, unless you fully buy into the Mormon-centered lifestyle. That subtle distance wears on people over time. Utah is already showing signs of strain from the massive influx of new residents over the past several years. Salt Lake City, in particular, is feeling it. Crime rates there have risen sharply. Right now, the city's crime rate sits at roughly 186% above the national average. Back in 2015, that number was closer to 22% above average. That's not a small shift. It's a dramatic change in a relatively short period of time. If current trends continue, especially in and around Salt Lake City, more people are going to start second-guessing their move over the next few years. The thing about Utah is that regret doesn't usually come with dramatic complaints or loud exits. People don't rage about it. They quietly decide it's not for them. Utah functions well, but systems that are already thriving don't easily adjust to outsiders. Newcomers are expected to adapt, not the other way around. Real estate only adds to the pressure. In 2020, Utah's median home price was about $368,000. Since then, prices have climbed by roughly 56%. As housing becomes less attainable and social integration remains difficult, Utah's polished exterior may start cracking for people who expected it to feel more welcoming than it actually is. Number 3. Texas. Texas sells itself as the land of opportunity, but what many newcomers discover is a stack of invoices waiting on the other side. Property taxes hit harder than expected. Insurance costs catch people off guard. Commutes stretch endlessly across massive metro areas. Add in extreme weather that regularly disrupts comfort, and sometimes entire power grids, and the shine starts to wear off. Low taxes sound great in theory, but for many residents, that advantage gets canceled out by rising costs everywhere else. Yes, Texas still prides itself on being tax-friendly. That part is real. But real estate prices are climbing, utility bills keep increasing, insurance premiums are rising. Everything feels more expensive than people were promised. While that's happening nationwide, Texas has long been known for being affordable, open, and easy to settle into. That reputation is slowly eroding. The state is starting to show stress fractures where there used to be confidence. For years, Texas was consistently ranked first, second, or third among the most moved-to states in the country. Now it's closer to fifth. Still strong, but noticeably down from its peak. A lot of people are feeling worn out by Texas, and much of that fatigue comes from how fast and how much the state has grown. The classic Texas vibe many longtime residents loved feels diluted. With so many newcomers arriving, the culture doesn't feel as familiar as it once did. A lot of frustration gets aimed at Californians, and to be fair, Texas probably has the strongest case for that complaint. The state has absorbed a massive number of transplants from California. But the story doesn't stop there. When you combine all the southern states, especially the Deep South, more people from those regions have moved to Texas than Californians. And many of the Californians moving in aren't strangers, they're returning families. Parents, grandparents, or great-grandparents left Texas decades ago, particularly during the migration waves of the 1940s through the 1980s. Now that flow is reversing, and Texas isn't exactly enjoying the adjustment. All of this growth is putting serious pressure on infrastructure. And infrastructure isn't just highways. It means new schools, hospitals, bridges, utilities, and entire support systems. Maintaining those things costs money, and at some point, Texas may have to chip away at its low-tax identity to fund them. That possibility alone changes the equation for people who moved there, expecting long-term affordability. While Texas hasn't seen housing prices spike as dramatically as some other states on this list, affordability has always been its selling point. And that advantage is shrinking. In 2020, the median home price in Texas was around $242,000. By 2025, it had risen to approximately $295,000, a jump of about 22%. It's not the worst increase, but in a state built on the promise of being cheap and welcoming, even that shift is enough to make people start reconsidering. Number 2. Colorado. Colorado is one of the hardest places to regret out loud, mostly because the views are impossible to argue with. The scenery is stunning, no question. But mountains don't fix traffic jams, overcrowded cities, or the stress of trying to afford a home. People came chasing outdoor freedom. What they found instead were reservation systems, packed trails, and endless loops around parking lots. Housing prices shot up fast, and if you bought late, that financial sting never really goes away, even when the view is perfect. Colorado didn't lose what made it special. It just took on more people than it can comfortably handle. That's the real issue. The state is still popular, and people are still moving in. But the shine isn't what it used to be. The beauty is still there. The opportunities are still there. But so are growing problems. Large homeless populations in urban centers, rising crime in places like Denver, and a general sense that the infrastructure is overwhelmed. Mountain towns are completely out of reach for most people. They're priced for the wealthy, not for everyday residents. And longtime locals, especially those who've been there 20 years or more, aren't exactly rolling out the welcome mat. There's a strong "we're full" energy across much of the state. And yes, technically there's the eastern half of Colorado, but let's be honest, that stretch is flat, forgettable, and feels more like Kansas with a new name. Colorado has been desirable for a long time, and popularity always comes with consequences. If rising costs don't eventually push people out, something else might. Fire season is a big one. When wildfires roll in, those smoky months take a real toll, especially on your lungs. It's not just inconvenient, it's exhausting year after year. Financially, the numbers tell part of the story. In 2020, the median home price in Colorado was about $387,000. By 2025, that figure had climbed to roughly $555,000, an increase of around 43.3%. And even that 5-year window doesn't fully capture how long affordability has been slipping away. Quick pause before we get to number 1. If you're finding this useful, hit that thumbs up button. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and ring the bell so you don't miss future uploads. Alright, let's get to the final one. Number 1. Florida. Florida sits at the top of the list as the ultimate relocation burnout. Not because it's terrible, but because it wears people down. Slowly, relentlessly. People arrive chasing freedom. No state income tax, endless sunshine, and the promise of an easier, lighter lifestyle. In the beginning, it delivers. Things feel loose. Life feels simpler. Then the fine print starts stacking up. Insurance renewals change every year, often dramatically. HOA notices never stop coming. Surprise special assessments appear that nobody planned for. Storm season turns half the calendar into a long stretch of background anxiety, where everyone's waiting to see what forms offshore and where it might land. You're not living through one big disaster, you're constantly bracing for the next one. And then there's Florida's people. Let's be honest, they're different. Those Florida man headlines don't invent themselves. Weird stuff happens there because people are actually doing weird things. I've mentioned this before, but there was a guy who got arrested for sneaking into strangers' homes and sucking on their toes while they slept. Total strangers. No consent. Not some shared situation, just chaos. He eventually got caught, thankfully. I can only imagine how that hobby worked out for him in prison. Florida doesn't overwhelm you with one massive flaw. It bombards you with dozens of smaller problems, all the time. Costs feel random. Bills fluctuate without warning. Plans depend on weather forecasts, insurance rules, and whatever regulation just changed last week. Florida works best if you have money, because money cushions unpredictability. If you're living on a budget, Florida keeps pushing back, testing your patience over and over. Most people don't leave because they hate Florida. They leave because they're drained. They're tired of juggling details, reacting to surprises, and managing constant instability. Florida isn't a bad place to live. It's just a high-maintenance relationship, and not everyone wants that long-term. Financially, the trend is clear. In 2020, Florida's median home price was about $267,000. By 2025, it had climbed to roughly $374,000, an increase of nearly 39.8%. Combine rising costs with non-stop complexity, and it's easy to see why Florida tops the regret list.